bit late, don't worry, we'll send out the recording and you can catch up at your own leisure. So hi, I'm Pete Waddingham. I'm the Net Zero lead for the Academic Health Science Network. I've helped organise this event in collaboration with the Greener NHS team. The first thing I just wanted to say is welcome, but thank you for taking the time to come and join us today. I'm really looking forward to this event. I've heard a little bit about the work previously. I know a couple of the speakers and I've seen the work, but I think this is a really good example of a quality improvement approach to sustainability, where we're going to look at some data. We've got kind of audit toolkits and checklists and resources. And that, regardless of the subject of nitrous oxide waste, is really important across anything to do with sustainability and net zero. So I'm convinced that I'm going to learn something as well myself today, and that we can share that learning into other areas. So as I said, welcome and thank you for your time. We've got some brilliant speakers. I'm just going to whip through the agenda really quickly because, as I said, it's a packed out hour, unfortunately. We've got Peter Morgan kicking off in a minute. He's just going to give an overview of medicines and net zero and why it's important in relation to nitrous oxide waste. Greg is going to take us through the Greener NHS dashboard, which I'm really looking forward to as well, because I like data, and as I said, I think it's really important when we're looking at net zero schemes. We've got Sophie and Becki doing a demo of the resources that are on the Greener NHS Futures page, and then we've got Laura and Adrian talking about their experience of conducting an audit at King's College. And then last but not least, Marc from Hull Hospital, who I know Marc and I've seen some of his work, and again, I think it's another great case study and an example of how you can get some results really quickly. We're going to try and save some time for some Q&As. Please put some questions in the chat. We're going to be monitoring them. But first up, before I hand over to Peter, we're just going to do a quick poll on a couple of things. So I've set this up, but it's the first time actually I'm using this feature in Teams. So let me just launch the first one, which is just which area you come from. Hopefully there's enough choice there. Has that come up on screen? Yes, it has. Good. We're on fire already. That's excellent. I'm just going to fill in mine, otherwise it'll stay on my screen. I'll put that one that aligns as close. Good. Okay, well, we've got 55 people on the call, so we've had 28 responses. So let me just give that a few more seconds because I think it is useful intelligence to gather. So thank you for doing that, and thanks for being a test bed on this feature, because as I said, I've never used it before, but I really like it. I think it's a great function. We're nearly up there to 56. Just going to give a few more seconds for people to vote. As I said, I think in theory it should pop up on your screen, and unless you vote, you'll just yeah, we all love a good poll. Thanks, Alexis. I can see many of us using this feature in many a Teams call from now on. Good, we're nearly there. I'm going to click done on that, and then I'm just going to launch a couple more if that's okay. Yeah, here we go. Let me just have a look. Going to launch this one because this will be important. We just need to collect and collate some intelligence before the event, and then we'll do it after. So how confident are you in undertaking a nitrous oxide waste audit at your trust? And the reason it says pre is obviously because I'm going to ask this question at the end as well, just to see if we can improve people's knowledge and confidence. I could certainly vote myself on this one. I'm not going to tell you what answer I've gone for. Lovely. So again, I'll just give it a few seconds if that's okay. Nearly there. I've got a few more people joining, which is good. So nearly up to 60, which is excellent. As I said, the recording will be available after the session, and we'll send out some slides and other resources. So those that have registered but that couldn't make it today, we kind of knew that would happen. But it's good that you've registered. Okay, I'm going to move on, I think. Probably got about 10 people that haven't voted. I'll just click done on that. And then last but not least, there is just one more question that we need to ask, I think. Which again is just to collect some information before we've given you the presentations today, and again just to see how clear you are. So how clear are you on the steps available to your trust following doing that audit? So do you know what you would need to do once you've done an audit to help reduce nitrous oxide waste within your trust? So if you don't know of any actions to take, then that would be a not at all. And if you're absolutely certain that you know what you're doing, brilliant. Let's share that knowledge and click on that one as well. Good, we are nearly there. Okay, well, thank you for that. As I said, there were just the questions at the beginning. We've got some more at the end. But for now, I can stop sharing my screen and hand over to Peter Morgan, please.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pete. And a great way to start testing out some of the new tech there. I think that's really interesting. So, afternoon all, I'm Peter Morgan, NHS Net Zero Assistant Director at NHS England. Great to see so many of you here today wanting to either learn more around what you're doing, or maybe for the first time that you might be thinking about this agenda. So we've got a great group of speakers on today that'll hopefully be able to support you in that journey from wherever you're at. So I'll talk a little bit around the team and who we are and our areas of focus, and certainly kind of dive a little bit more into the nitrous oxide and priorities from a national perspective. But I will keep it short because there are much more interesting speakers after me in this agenda. So we're a multidisciplinary team. We report both into the Greener NHS team and the NHS England Commercial Medicines Directorate. Our primary aim and responsibility is in reducing the carbon emission from medicines, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, account for 25% of the emissions for the NHS, which is roughly about 1% of the emissions in England.
Talking about me, how rude.
I think someone's not muted.
Yeah, just, I might be able to.
I think I've got them. Yeah.
Lovely. Excellent.
So the reduction is to align with the NHS commitment set out in the Delivering an NHS Net Zero report, which is now set in law to achieve net zero for the emissions that we control by 2040 and net zero for all emissions under our influence, so the NHS Carbon Footprint Plus by 2045. So to do this, the team works across a wide range of areas, but our current focuses are on kind of the medicines in the supply chain, which is supported by the NHS Net Zero Supplier Roadmap, again, which is set out in law, which has various actions incorporating social value model into procurements. And then finally, the requirement for suppliers to publish and act on carbon reduction plans along that pathway. Our second kind of area of focus on inhalers. It has 4 key areas: supporting the use of lower carbon propellants, optimizing inhaler choice through decision making, improving inhaler technique, and finally, the greener inhaler disposal. Kind of be amiss if I didn't take this opportunity to raise some of those agendas. If you have any influence in those areas, please look into that. But kindly, I focus more for today on anaesthetic and medical gases and agents. So we have a single priority on reducing the amount of desflurane. In this year's standard contract, we've got that as a total of 5% of total volatile gases at less than 5%. We know approximately 40 trusts have completely decommissioned and are no longer using desflurane. And then probably our key focus for today is on the reduction of nitrous oxide waste. So identifying wastage, which we know can account for up to 95% of supply, but then also to take subsequent action to reduce down the waste. And from the the informative polls we've had this morning, hopefully we'll be able to push those up from kind of 2 to 3 out of 5, all the way up to 4 to 5 out of 5. So we have some supporting information. We have a toolkit on the NHS Futures page, which is based on the great work by Alifia Chakira, and also more available resources and case studies that we're building all the time and putting up onto there. So we'll make sure that the link goes out and you know how to kind of access that. So before I hand over to your colleagues who can share some of their challenges and success in this area, I just wanted to thank Pete and the team at the AHSN network for supporting this, the wider colleagues in NHS England and working with us to put it all together, the brilliant webinar, and our speakers for taking their time out, sharing their learning, and finally all of you for attending and listening to it. Hopefully this will help us all on our journey to a more sustainable future and use of medicines.
I agree, Peter. No, thank you for that. And as I said, we'll keep rattling through, because next up is Greg looking at the dashboard, which again, as I said, I'm really interested in the data. I think it's fundamental. So we'll hand over to you, Greg. Thank you. You've only got 5 minutes, but I'm sure we can allow a little bit more if we need to. But try and keep to those 5 minutes if you can, Greg.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. So yes, I'm just going to take you through the kind of Greener NHS dashboard. So my name's Greg Eydmann. I'm the Senior Analytical Manager in the Medicines Net Zero team. So I'm not sure, I imagine, given I can see some of the people, some familiar faces, I know that some people know about the Greener NHS dashboard, but for those who don't, it's basically a hosted application that anyone with a NHS account, or specifically an Okta account, is able to access. If you're not sure if you have an Okta account, if you ever accessed Model Hospital or Model Health System before, you have one, and yeah, it's available to most NHS staff. So here's some information about how you can register it. This will obviously be shared around to everyone on the call today, and also you can then kind of you can disseminate to others for those who want to get access. Essentially, it is a dashboard that allows users to view data on a range of measures covering sustainability, so not just nitrous oxide. We have other medicines data, such as things about volatile gases such as desflurane and sevoflurane. We have information about inhalers as well, and then not just medicine, so things about transport, fleet and estates. So what I'm just going to do is show a few screenshots of it now. These are basically just taken from pages on the Greener NHS dashboard. I won't go into too much details about the actual numbers here, but kind of give you an overview of what you can find there. So essentially, in terms of nitrous oxide, you can get breakdowns of the emissions by different service lines. So we kind of split it ambulance, maternity, surgery, and A&E, and then also by the whether it's pure nitrous oxide or whether it's mixed as well, and whether it's portable and manifold. So you can basically get some high level statistics here. You'll notice there are filters here. So this is at national level. You'll be able to filter down region, ICSs, down to kind of trust level as well. So you can see exactly how your trust is doing and how you are doing compared to kind of like national averages as well. This is all at financial year level. You can also see the monthly data here, so you'll be able to see how your emissions are looking, split by kind of mixed nitrous oxide or pure. And you can also change this to look at the actual raw number of litres of nitrous oxide as well. And essentially, you'd hope to see that this number decrease over the months. There are some assumptions here in terms of how we split things like A&E and ambulance and maternity. It's all detailed in this metadata and data quality tabs, and you can find all the information there about how it's split, as well as things like the GWP, so the global warming potential, and other kind of assumptions we make in terms of turning those kind of litres of nitrous oxide into our equivalent CO2 emissions. So this kind of looks at focusing on use. We also have some information about waste as well on a different page in the Greener NHS dashboard. So what you see at the top here, this is one of the new measures that we've kind of implemented, which shows you your average emissions per maternity delivery. Now, this isn't like an indication of, oh, you know, your trust, the deliveries, the average is too high, but it should give you an indication of whether you potentially might have a waste problem, especially if you're kind of over on the right, one of the extreme outliers. We think the average should be around about kind of just under 400, and I think the nitrous oxide toolkit kind of gives some kind of expected figures as well. So you're one of the trusts in your region who's quite high up, you know, around 600 to 700, that might be an indication that you might have a waste issue, but there could also be reasons why your use is so high. So it's just it just gives you something that might be worth investigating, rather than this being actually a specific problem. We also have kind of the responses to the nitrous oxide audit, so you can see how you've responded and how kind of that might compare to national figures as well. And this data gets updated, so we try to aim to get the data updated at least every quarter, but we're hoping to get that a little bit more regular in the future. So yeah, that's all I wanted to show, is just a couple of the metrics there that are available, and obviously it'd be good for people to go around and have a look at it themselves and see what they think, because again, we're always open to feedback as well on some other interesting metrics that might be useful.
Thank you, Greg. I didn't realise you'd get through all of that in 5 minutes, so well done on that. As I said at the beginning, I like my data, and I'm going to be looking at this dashboard, and I've tried to set myself up an account with Okta and get that access. So if anyone does struggle with that, just reach out to any one of us, and we'll try and help, because as we've said, and you know, data is really important for quality improvement and benchmarking. But the other thing I just wanted to mention really quickly is use it to celebrate success as well. I think we are going to hear from some speakers today about just what great work they've done, and I can't emphasize this enough. Please shout about the success, because I think as well, it's, you know, we need to all feel good about the work that we're doing, the contribution we're making, but show other people. So often I try and get people to talk about things on social media, because I think it's a good way of sharing that, but data and a good statistic can help that. So thank you, Greg. Let's move on to the next speaker, which is Sophie and Becki, just giving an overview of the Greener NHS or Futures NHS page for the resources that are available.
Thanks, Pete. So I'm Sophie. I'm an anaesthetic trainee, and I was one of the Chief Sustainability Officer Clinical Fellows working with the medicines team, and Becki and I worked together on all things anaesthetics and nitrous oxide when we were there. So technology allowing, I'm going to try and share my screen with you. Has that come across? Can anyone see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thank you very much. So just before Becki runs through the methodology, I'm just going to quickly go through how to access and find some of the resources that we've been talking about. I know Future NHS has been mentioned a couple of times already today. So firstly, you need to go to the Future NHS platform. We'll put the link in and send it around afterwards as well. And if you haven't already subscribed, then you do need to sign up with an NHS account. And then once you're in, you get your dashboard. And once you're established, you have a list of workplaces that you are subscribed to. But in the first instance, if you want to find where all this information is, you need to go to find a workspace. And if you type in Knowledge Hub and search, internet forbidding, yeah, there we go. It's the first one that comes up. So you should be able to click onto the Greener NHS Knowledge Hub. And my internet's being incredibly slow today. So hopefully that works. Excellent. So just a quick note that you do sometimes need to subscribe to access for these pages. It should be fairly straightforward. There should be a box that comes up that allows you to request access, and it is fairly quick to do so. But once you're in, you have this page here that has all sorts of wonderful resources. And if you scroll down to the bottom and go on to tools and resources, and again, wait for the internet to load and scroll down again, and then you've got reducing anaesthetic gas emissions. And the reason we're running through this is it's a little bit tricky to find the first time, but afterwards it is fairly straightforward. So once you're on here, you have a whole host of different links and resources available to you. There's a brief overview as to why it's important, and then you've got resources linked from both volatile and nitrous oxide, as well as a few more general links to other reputable sources that have really good sources of information. So you've got case studies, you've got a link to the Greener NHS dashboard that Greg was just talking about, which is a really excellent resource for data. I highly recommend that you get access to that. And then you've also got the link to the nitrous oxide toolkit that we've been talking about. So if you click on the big picture, you've got the option to either download it or to run through it online as well, which I'm not sure my internet will allow me doing. So at this point, I will stop presenting and I will hand over to Becki to hopefully run through the toolkit with you.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, I'm Becki. I'm an anaesthetic registrar, and I was a fellow with Greener NHS and Sophie last year working on nitrous oxide. Just trying to share my slides, and I'll talk you through some of the resources that we've got. Okay, and just tell me, Sophie, can you see my slides?
Just loading for me.
How about now?
Yeah, all good.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're looking at nitrous oxide waste here. So here are some resources for you. And if you scan that QR code, that will take you to where Sophie just took you to find those resources. And as many of you will know, the nitrous oxide project started with Olivia Shakira, pharmacist in Scotland, who realised that hospitals were wasting a lot of the nitrous oxide they were ordering. And that's mainly through leaking from pipes, cylinders expiring on the background of the fact we're just not using it as much in surgery anymore, and also theft potentially. So some of the resources, and I'll show you some screenshots from one of them, which is the toolkit, will show you a bit about how to go about doing a waste project. So there are 5 main steps to reduce waste, and I'll just go through each one in turn. The first is for the medical gas committee within the hospital to establish an MDT, a multidisciplinary team, to work towards zero emissions for nitrous oxide products. So the people who should be on that team really are here. So obviously you will need your pharmacist, you will need your estates team and authorised persons who deal with the manifolds and medical gases and porters. But you'll also need the clinicians who use those medications, so particularly anaesthetists and theatre staff, but also endoscopy, maternity and emergency department, and obviously your sustainability leads, and anyone who's on the call really who deals with this kind of thing might want to be involved in that MDT. Once you've got your team together, the next thing to do is to look at your waste. And this is where we can see you need to look at how much is being turned over in the manifolds and then compare that with actual clinical usage. The actual clinical usage part, and if we're just talking about nitrous oxide itself now, that's mostly where you're going to need anaesthetists. That's because we can tell you exactly what we're using. And the way to do that is usually to do a qualitative analysis, which is mainly to survey the anaesthetists in the department and ask them how often they use it and for what types of cases, and how they feel about, getting rid of it. And also quantitative analysis. So actually looking at the anaesthetic machines, which can keep logs on how much is actually being used. And sometimes you'll be able to get that on a weekly basis. Sometimes you'll be able to get a whole year's worth of data on what's being used. So that will help you to determine what's being used. And you can compare that then with the manifold turnover. If it turns out that you're changing cylinders on the manifold every 3 days, but the clinical usage suggests you should only be doing that every 3 months, then there's going to be waste somewhere. So this is an example of a survey that you can do, and you can find all of this on that resources page and in the toolkit. And here's an example of an audit sheet that you might find on the manifold. These sheets should be filled in every time a cylinder is changed. So that will allow you to tell how often it's being changed. And also if any of those cylinders are expiring and just being sent back to the manufacturer unused, in that scenario, they will be vented to atmosphere and continue to cause global warming. So we absolutely don't want that to be happening if we can avoid it. This is an image of a manifold. So these are large, usually size G or size J nitrous oxide cylinders, and they will usually automatically change over once one becomes empty. And you can, change the size of these and make them smaller. But this is often the place where you'll be able to find those logbooks and see what's going on. And then once you've done those initial steps, this is then mapped out in terms of all the places you need to look for that waste. So if you find that actually there is a big difference between what you're buying and what you're using, and what you're buying you'll be able to find out on the Greener NHS dashboard, then you need to find out where the problem is. So the first bit here is about mapping out schematics. So that is, where are your pipes actually going in the hospital? We've known some sites that have found that when they've looked at that, there have been nitrous oxide pipes going to theatres that are just never used. And so they don't actually need it there. And they never use that drug, but it was leaking. So finding out actually where it's going and where the outlets are in the hospital. And then finding out actually where is it still being used and where is it not being used, and we can cut off that supply. Looking for leaks, so that involves looking at those logbooks and comparing that turnover, and then making sure that checks are being done. But even a really small leak of 1 litre a minute can be 500,000 litres a year. So, sometimes the routine checks don't pick it up, and then your estates team would need to do something called a pressure drop test to find out if there's a problem with leaks between the manifold and between the operating theatres. Once you've had a look for leaks, you can also look at stock management, and that will tell you if you're sending back cylinders that have expired. If you actually look at those logbook sheets and find out that, those have a 3-year expiry and actually you're sending lots of them back every year, can it be that actually you can change your ordering schedule and only order what you need? Or perhaps your anaesthetic department will decide they actually don't need nitrous oxide anymore, and you can stop ordering it. So that's a decision that some departments have come to if they felt it's right for them. And that will depend on the case mix that they do as well. If they do lots of obstetrics and paediatrics, they may be less keen to get rid of nitrous. So it really depends if it's right for their patient populations. And then the next thing is reviewing security as well. So has there been any theft? Is there any possibility of theft? And do you know where all of those cylinders are going once they're delivered? And there's also then a way to look at waste for entonox. And as Greg mentioned, you can look at deliveries and whether your average CO2 equivalents per delivery are in keeping. The reason I've come on to this last is because it's a slightly different way of looking at usage than nitrous oxide itself. It's not quite as simple as looking at an anaesthetic machine and seeing how much we use. So that's why we've got this method that's on the Greener NHS dashboard. But once you've worked that out, it's a similar scenario where you need to look at the manifold logbooks and look if there are any leaks. And often sites have chosen to start with nitrous oxide first and then learn the lessons from that. If they found its stock expiring or they found its leaks or theft, they've then applied those to the Entonox or mixed nitrous oxide cylinders as well. And so that's your waste review. Once you've done that, next you need to decide what you need to do. So as soon as you've determined how much waste you've got, where do you go on to next? So if you're not using it in certain areas, could you actually just stop ordering it and stop supplying it to those areas? But if there are some areas where you are using it persistently, you need to decide what's right next. And that's why you need this multidisciplinary team, because it will depend on your clinicians who actually use it. It will depend on, what the hospital is paying for and what the estates and pharmacy teams also feel is best. So it is a multidisciplinary decision. And for some sites, they have decided to decommission their manifold and go to cylinder supply. But if your usage is still high, then cylinders can give you waste. So it really does depend. And there are plenty of case studies around. So we're going to hear from a couple of those sites later. So I won't go into that too much. But essentially, if you're struggling with that decision, there will be someone who's come across that before. And you can contact us and we can usually put you in touch with someone who's come across a similar scenario. And this is just something from the nitrous oxide toolkit as well, which goes into potential cost savings, because that's a common question that we get. And really just to say that nitrous is an inexpensive drug, but don't just take into account the cost of the drug itself. There's also the cost of hiring cylinders and of maintenance of the manifold. So it's not usually as simple as just the cost of the drug. And just to illustrate with a case, this is one site, and in the toolkit you'll find lots of different case studies, and on the resources page access to other case studies. But in this site they found that they were changing the cylinder every 4 days. Actually, when they looked at their anaesthetic usage for their nitrous oxide, they only needed to be changing it every 9 months. So actually they were using 4 million litres, which was about 98% waste for them. And they chose to decommission their manifold. That was the right decision for them on that site. And they've ordered a couple of size E cylinders to use in its place. So the smaller cylinders that can go on the back of anaesthetic machines. But because they're barely using it, they're not going to need a lot of those cylinders. So they've actually managed to save, I reckon, about £12,000 a year as well. So you can email greener.nhs@nhs.net and we'll send out some other contact details if you need to contact us. But I think it's going to be really great to hear from the teams who have already done this so you can see the real world application of it.
Lovely, thank you.
Lovely, thank you for that.
Bit of an echo. Is that your mic, Becki?
Becki.
Let me try now. That's good. It's gone. Excellent. No, thank you for that. And we've just got another a minute before we are a minute ahead of schedule. So again, I just wanted to reflect really quickly. And as I said, I was looking forward to this event, even though I've been involved in planning it, because I'm not close to nitrous oxide, but I knew there'd be learning in here for other quality improvement and sustainability work. And I think the resources look fantastic. You've made them visually look nice, which I think is appealing. People want to look at toolkits that are nice. I think you've made it look easy, which again, from a sort of behavioural psychology perspective is really important. Things need to be easy and accessible. So well done on creating that. It looks a really, really good resource. And again, just quickly, while we've got a few seconds, I know Sarah, you're helping me in the chat. There's lots of responses and questions there, and so thank you for doing that. And just to emphasize Becky's point as well, don't be frightened to reach out to people that have done this. I mean, that toolkit looks great, but and I'm gonna use the worst pun ever, but if you're living and breathing it, it's you're a bit close to it. But if there's something where you think, do you know what, I just don't know what I need to do next, or I'm struggling to find this information, I've done it before myself. We create resources and we try and make them easy and quick to use, but it doesn't sometimes just reaching out to someone, an email, a phone call can answer that question quickly. And actually just reaching out to people might mean that we need to reshape something and just make something a little bit clearer. So thank you for that, Becki. It looks a great resource, and I'm sure people will look forward to reading it. So next up then, we can now hear some live examples, because as Becki said, she didn't want to steal people's thunder, and I know there's some great work happening. So let's hand over next, if we can, to Laura and Adrian from King's College Hospital, just about how you've approached it.
Hi, Pete, thanks. It's just me today. Unfortunately, Adrian's been called to look after labour ward, so he's really busy. So you're just stuck with me, unfortunately. I will just share my slide. My computer did just crash before this, so I'm hoping it's going to work, but please bear with me.
Laura, I can share them if that would be helpful.
It's taking its time. I think it's coming, but thank you, Tori.
There we go. I think it's coming through now.
Great.
Yeah, it's there.
I can
Lovely.
almost see them, so great. Yeah, can everyone see that? Perfect. Okay, thanks so much. Yeah, so basically, it's just me today, but we just wanted to present our nitrous oxide waste reduction project. And yeah, essentially, this is the slide that's been used a million times, definitely stolen it from the Greener NHS. But yeah, it's just to point out exactly why we're doing this project and why we started. So we do know that 5% of the carbon emissions from the NHS come from anaesthetic acids and inhalers. So this is why we're focused on nitrous oxide. And from the KCH point of view, we wanted to look at, before we started this project, what our carbon footprint looked like. So obviously we can see here, whilst we know deslorine is a huge problem and carries a huge carbon footprint, actually nitrous oxide used so much at King's that it's a problem that we knew we needed to tackle. So the aim of our project, we obviously wanted to reduce our nitrous oxide waste to reduce the carbon footprint at King's. So when we started looking into it, we realised that actually piped nitrous oxide from manifold systems is a more significant problem than that of clinical usage. So we really just wanted to look at waste, and we wanted to make that really obvious from the get-go to all our stakeholders. We're not here to tell you to stop using nitrous oxide. We're here to look at ways that we can tackle the waste. So how did we do this? So first of all, we did some data collection, and I'll go through all of these points individually. So we looked at the data that we could get from the Greener NHS dashboards and also what we could get from VOC. Then we carried out our own clinical audit to look at actual clinical use as well as what we were buying in. We defined our waste, so we wanted to make sure that even though we knew there was leaks or there was problems with the manifolds, actually where was all the waste coming from, and it wasn't just one area. And then, of course, decommissioning and alternative supplies, and then our next steps. So the first thing we did, like I said, was data collection. So we looked at how we could exactly what we were getting in from VOC. So this graph I always find really interesting, because essentially this is what our size G cylinders that we use in the manifold nitrous oxide delivered and returned. So that graph should be linear to me, because what you're delivering and what returned should be the same. But obviously it's not, as you can see. So we kind of wanted to look at why this was. So we know there's a few things around that, around the things that the lifetime of the cylinder is 3 years. So return data could be higher than delivery data, but also they should be adding up in the long run, which they weren't. And we know that each G cylinder contains 9,000 litres of nitrous oxide. So that actually gave us on average 2.3 million litres in 2019 and 1.3 million in 2020. So I'd like to say that drop in 1 million litres was because we started to do this, but it was definitely because of COVID. And whilst we were doing this, we looked at challenges and recommendations that we just wanted to point out in this presentation as well. So that's a picture of a manifold for anyone who hasn't seen one, because I certainly hadn't seen one before we started this project. And I'd say definitely the best thing to do if you're going to start a project like this, go and see your manifolds, take pictures, understand logbooks, understand the whole process, because that will really help. And when we really looked into defining our waste for this step, we looked at TIMWOODS, which is actually an acronym for the 8 deadly wastes. And it stands for transportation, inventory, motion, weighting, overprocessing, overproduction, defects, and skills. So that was really useful, because we were able to start looking at things like the fact that we knew there was too many deliveries coming to site. So obviously that's a huge transportation waste. We were way over ordering There was people coming and changing these manifolds way more often than they needed to. So just so much waste in terms of people's skills, transport, as well as obviously the leaks. So the next slide, the next thing we did was our clinical audit. So I'm hoping you can see this graph quite clearly. But I think the main thing to take away from this is obviously the huge difference between the manifold data that we gathered and then the clinical usage data. So it estimated that we were using about 83,460 litres yearly of nitrous oxide. And when we compared that to what we were actually plugging into the manifolds and what we were delivering in VOC, the difference in these two lines is 915,000 litres. So that's about 92% of all the nitrous oxide at King's currently being wasted. So big, not that we were that surprised because we'd heard from other trusts and their data, but still quite shocking when you see it. So a couple of challenges that we had when doing our clinical audit was really the dental side of things, I would say. So it's quite a separate process in the hospital. We had a lot of help from anaesthetists, but they don't work in dental. So Adrian would tell you if he was here that it was a real challenge to get them to cover their data, but obviously because they use nitrous oxide quite a lot as well. So yeah, a recommendation would be to get all areas on board to collect the data at the same time, because otherwise you're left with an incomplete data set, and that can be quite difficult then. So defining our waste after we lifted these two first steps, so we realised that there was clinical audit reveals areas that had zero use, which was really helpful for the next step. And then of course the manifold turnover being higher than clinical usage. So we wanted to look at these two main areas to take our next steps from. So obviously our main next step was decommissioning. So we kind of wanted to start with a big bang approach. We really wanted to say, okay, we know there's a big problem at King's. How can we make a big solution really quickly? So I would say we're lucky in a way because we immediately identified a manifold that could be decommissioned, and that was our liver theatres manifold. So our clinical audit showed zero usage, and the thing about this manifold is it's quite a big manifold. So it was 2x6 bank, so 12 cylinders at any one time on the manifold. So a large standalone manifold that we could easily capture and decommission. We were really lucky when we approached our stakeholders. Everyone was really on board with decommissioning this manifold. We had really no objections, which I do, on talking to other trusts, feel that we were lucky with that. So we decided to propose this Gantt chart to help us with our sort of PDSA cycle on how we were going to do this. And we wanted to look at eliminating waste due to the expiry of cylinders, leakage and piping, and of course the return of any partially used cylinders that are sent back to VOC. So our measure in reduction is cylinder count, and we decided this would be 12. It owns the number on the bank, and that equates to 71 tonnes of carbon dioxide per 12 cylinders. So we went through the plan, which actually worked really, really well for us. We did a 3-week trial period to see how it would work in theory, and actually it went really well. We ended up cutting the trial period short and just decommissioning the manifold, and that was because it was actually really onerous on our estates colleagues to constantly have to go and check this manifold, make sure no one was using it, and then of course the other problem was alarms started going off. So what we did was we turned it off at either end, knowing that the system was still live, so the pressure had to remain at a certain level, but of course that pressure slowly started to drop over time because of micro leaks in the pipework. So we actually just ended up decommissioning early, and again we had no issues with that. That was really good, and we're actually totally decommissioned now. We stuck to our Gantt chart really well, so that is one manifold that we've completely decommissioned at King. Of course, we can't decommission any manifold, so without offering an alternative supply, I don't think we would have had such an open and happy response if we had said we weren't going to give them anything in return. So these are the two options that we're using at King's at the minute. So for our liver theatres area, we use the flow adapter and trolley option, and that's because it's one single area, so it's really easy for them to have this. They can keep the trolley and the nitrous oxide portable cylinders, the size E's, close to the theatres on the ward. It's really easy for them or porters to go and get it if it's needed. So it's a really cost-effective option as well. It's actually quite cheap. So you just have to purchase a trolley and a flow adapter compared to the anaesthetic gas machine. a much more expensive option, and you can see the prices on there. So we've been quoted about £1,800 per machine of converted anaesthetic gas machines. I think in most areas, the converted anaesthetic gas machine would be the preferred option. It takes up less space. You don't have a trolley in the way in theatres, which are already small areas. But obviously there's things around it as well, like the fact that it's a permanent switch. So once you've done it, you can't change it back. So it's difficult to do without funding, not impossible, but definitely difficult, certainly for the conversion of anaesthetic machines. So we're planning for a combination of approaches at King's, and that depends on the clinical use of each area. So we have decommissioned one manifold, we're on to decommission our second manifold. This one's a little bit more challenging just because we have a mix of opinions around the flow adapter and the converted anaesthetic gas machines. But yes, we'll get there. So tracking our progress as well. I just kind of
sorry, Laura, just to interrupt. Can you make this your last slide, please? Just because we're slightly running over, if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, so this was just to say that this is how we're tracking our progress. So we have a lot of data now, and we just wanted to make sure that we're tracking it properly. So essentially, we want to use our tons of carbon dioxide equivalent based on our number of large desal cylinders that we buy in every month to track our progress. So you can see when we did our decommissioning, and we've also done a BOC order freeze where we're not buying in any desal cylinders from BOC currently. And if we do need some, that comes from us instead of it being like sort of a milk bottle round from BOC. So far so good. And obviously we're getting the data in monthly from BOC, so we'll be able to track this monthly. And this is my lesson learned slide, but that is my last slide. So I'll just leave that on there.
Thank you, Laura. No, because we are running out of time, but then I just realised that we can all flick through the slides at the bottom. It's a nice feature, so I actually realised that you only had one or two more. But thank you for doing that. Really good presentation, really good benefits, outcomes, some really big numbers in there. But let's hand over to Marc. I think Marc's going to equally wow and impress us. And Marc, if you can save us a little bit of time just at the end for a Q&A and a wrap up, please.
Yep, no problem. I'll just look. Hopefully the slides are loading now.
Yeah, they're on the screen, Marc. Fire away.
Yeah, so thank you very much for asking me to come and speak today. A lot of really interesting stuff already, and our approach is very pretty much just replicated what's been discussed by Becki and Laura. I'll touch a little bit on Entonox. I think looking at the poll at the beginning of this, a lot of people on the call will know what Entonox is. It's an anaesthetic gas made up of 50-50 nitrous oxide and oxygen, and is obviously a lot more harmful than CO2. Something we've not mentioned much as yet today is the impact on health. It can have a number of consequences for people that are exposed to levels of nitrous oxide, all the way from headaches, nausea, lethargy to some more serious effects. There are COSH exposure limits for those, which interestingly in the UK we're about we're double the exposure limits that are allowed on Central Europe. So that's quite interesting, and also a helpful topic when discussing this with others and user groups. As to the importance of tackling this work. So we started looking at this early in 2021 and had a look at our emissions, and you can see there where our emissions sat previously, and that anaesthetic gases made up a significant chunk of our carbon footprint. So we knew it was an area for us to tackle. We're fortunate we've been recording our anaesthetic gas use for a number of years, and for us, the vast majority, 4,000 out of 5,000 tonnes of anaesthetic gas emissions came from the maternity manifold Entonox emissions. So we knew that was a key area for us to look at and target. So we worked with Olivia Chakir from the Nitrous Oxide project early on in the scheme. We've been made aware of the importance of this work. And as mentioned by Becki, we set up a multidisciplinary team. We involved our estates teams, pharmacy, midwifery teams, and for us our maternity hospital is a PFI, and We then went through and tested what was then kind of like the early toolkit parts of the checklist to carry out a nitrous oxide or an Entonox audit. So some key parts about this process, which I think were really important to the success of it, was collecting that data at the start of the project. So we're very fortunate now we've got the Greener NHS dashboard, but we're collecting the usage information from pharmacy, from porters or from BOC, and then getting for us the midwives involved to look at the birth data to give us that indicative figure on what our kilograms per birth were. We were very high on those figures when we did it earlier. We were around 800 kilos a birth. So we knew that we were an outlier, and having that data available when you then brought the various departments together was really important to be able to show the reason why this is something we needed to investigate and the wider benefits, both environmentally and for achieving our NHS targets. So what we did once we got people on board, we were again really fortunate, like Laura. Everyone saw the reason for doing this and the benefit of doing this. So we started at our manifold and then worked our way through the supply pipework to the bedhead units and finally to the probes on or the demand valves that plug into the bedheads, which the ladies in maternity would breathe from. So those last two areas for us, we did a pressure drop test. There are now some technologies for ultrasonic testing as well, which may allow others to do it slightly differently. Obviously for us that meant we had to plan it and we had to go on to mobile cylinder use for the period of those tests. But again, working with the PFIs, estates and the midwives, we were able to coordinate that and do it on a rolling programme. We've seen a lot of pictures for manifolds. We're very typical for an acute trust. You've seen pictures of a manifold room. Here's another one. And these are the bedhead units where we plug in our Entonox demand valves and what an Entonox demand valve looks like for those of you that may not be familiar with them. Again, as been said, it's worth getting out, having a look at these so you have familiarity about it and you can talk to the various teams about the equipment that we're discussing. So what we found was the manifold had no leaks. We couldn't detect any leaks on the supply pipeworks. When we came to do the drop test, we did notice that we had small leakage on the bedhead units. For us, the biggest area of leakage was the demand valves that were plugged in, and for us, our process in the trust was to have those valves plugged in 24/7, even when they weren't in use. The impact of that when we rectified the leakage in the manifold, and we were fortunate we got the midwives to change the day we did the test, when we found out that having these plugged in was causing such a leak, they changed it the same day and then switched to a process of having them unplugged and only plugging them in when they were needed by a woman in labour. The impact of that was this significant reduction in our Entonox consumption. We had to check the data for a couple of months first because, similar to as Laura said, the figures are so big, the difference, it didn't seem quite believable, but it was when we went forwards. We validated the data with BOC, with our pharmacy teams. They were all engaged in the project. So the actual figures resulted in an 87% reduction in carbon emissions from our manifold supplied Entonox. That was equivalent to going down from 347 tonnes a month to 45. There's also all the additional benefits, as mentioned by Becki earlier. We were exchanging cylinders every couple of days. Now it's every couple of weeks. That means a lot less alarms going off for the estates team to deal with, a lot less cylinder exchanges for the portering teams, and a lot less transport emissions from having to deliver those cylinders to site. So there's a lot of additional benefits of doing this work. So in summary, I think it's really important to collect the data, having that data to be able to evidence it. When you set up that multidisciplinary team, you can then share that with them, show them why it needs to be done, and then work through the toolkit, carrying out the leakage audit in a methodical way. And if your maternity department aren't having their valves unplugged when not in use, I definitely recommend doing that. It removes 2 potential sources of leakage out of a potential 3 at the bedhead. So it seems to be a good practice process to adopt. That costs nothing and might just have a significant reduction in your Entonox usage. Thank you very much.
Very good, Marc. Thank you for keeping us on track in time. Really good presentation, and thanks to Laura as well. I did say right at the beginning, I would love people to shout about the work. I think you sat on some cracking slides with some brilliant statistics. I think you need to promote this wider. As I said, I'm a fan of social media. I know there's people on the call that are big social media fans. It always helps. I think it just pricks up people's ears. So a bit of a plea from me, use some of those slides and please keep promoting them. Some great results on there. I'm going to quickly go to the poll. We've got 9 minutes now. But I want to capture some feedback from people, and then we'll have a quick look at the Q&As. But I think we can follow up some of these Q&As outside of this meeting, which is probably helpful as well. So the first poll that's coming up, and please fill these in quickly, and then we can rattle through. So now, how confident are you in undertaking a nitrous oxide waste audit at your trust? Now, we've seen the resources, see how people have gone about it. Obviously, we're not expecting you to do one now and now to do it, you know, with Rayleigh's, but hopefully, because you've seen resources, does this now give you a little bit more confidence? How confident do you think you would be now? Please vote on that quickly. Thank you. We've had a few responses. How many people have we got on the call? Still like at 60 odd, so we've had about half voting. So thank you. Just a few more seconds with that. As I say, it's really helpful just to gather a little bit of pre and post feedback. The next one I'm going to launch as well, if that's okay. I don't know if everyone's managed to vote on that. But now, how clear are you on the next steps available to your trust following doing an audit? So, not to bias the results, but I do think we've had a good few different actions and some great sort of processes and project plans and ways to deal with things. So, how confident, or how clear, should I say, are you now on the potential steps available to your trust following the audit? Lovely, thank you. Again, the results are coming in thick and fast, which is helpful. What I will make sure I do is just make sure I'm comparing the number of responses in the pre to the post, just so that doesn't skew any. I've just thrown this quick question in because I'm going to use it tomorrow, but I quite like this as a bit of like a friends and family type test. But have you learned anything in this webinar that you didn't already know? I think that's quite important. So if you have learned something you didn't know, please click the yes. And if you already knew all of this content, please click no. But have you learned anything new in this webinar? Good. Okay, we have got a couple more polls to do, but I'm just going to flick to the questions, and then we can either just give you a flavour of what people are asking and maybe come back. But I'll trust the judgment of the other speakers on there. There is a question around the process of, you know, when we're decommissioning and what happens to that gas and when it's going back to the suppliers. And I think, again, that's probably one to answer outside of this. You know, my gut feel as well is I know that might be really painful, that gas might be going out in the atmosphere, but I think cutting off the demand for it in the first place is probably the area of benefit that we need to hold on to most. But there is a question around, you know, what happens to it when it's returned. There's some questions around data collection, how they can get this data, which we've heard is really important for the baseline. And then also there was a question about, you know, this looks very targeted at trusts. Are there any kind of plans to look at this more covering sort of, you know, ambulance services? So I'm just going to pause there and see if anyone from the speakers wants to answer any of those.
Thanks, Pete. I'm happy to kind of kick off on some of those answers. So on the venting to environment, we know that happens as it's a regulatory requirement. It was a requirement that was put in as a response to an incident a few years ago where cylinders were overpressurized and then kind of exploded as they were linked up to the manifold machine, breaking the manifold. So there are discussions with the suppliers of the cylinders, of the gases, with the MHRA to review this process, but obviously there are safety concerns around that, so they're reviewing it, which we're eagerly waiting a response on. But remember, as you kind of said, Pete, by leaning the supply to your clinical areas, you'll reduce the number of cylinders that you use, therefore reduce the number of cylinders that are being returned, therefore reducing the amount that is being vented. So there are steps that we can make now. But to pick up on the question around, you know, this is mainly targeted towards acute trusts rather than ambulance trusts at the moment, and that was really because we wanted to focus on almost the largest impact. And I'm sure maybe the people who've undertaken the audit, not necessarily the easiest, but from our side, the easiest kind of sell to do that. But we are also, as a team, looking at opportunities going forward that we can look at, if they, you know, are clinically appropriate alternatives for nitrous oxide or not used in different settings, and an ambulance setting is one of those that we've identified. But also we are looking at learning from pilots around destruction technologies as well, to look at if there is a place for those in different clinical settings. Again, ambulance being one of those, but obviously we're always conscious of the additional weight that these might add into the back of ambulances, which again is some feedback we've had, which is a bit of a consideration that we wouldn't have necessarily thought of otherwise. And then I think the question on data, so we're currently getting our data from BOC and Air Liquid, and there's another question in the chat about is there any backlash from them, and actually at the moment we haven't. And as a same with the sector-wide and industry-wide thing, pharma have actually been really engaging about reducing down the environmental impact of medicines. But we're getting the data from there, and then as kind of Greg outlined at the start, the data is up there on the NHS dashboard, so that's all available. I'm not sure if one of the other speakers want to come back with where they've got their data or where that's been useful for them.
I think, so I'll just quickly come in. I did see one about an anaesthetic machine as well. So some older machines might not record data. I think most do. Sometimes it is a matter of finding the person with the code to let you into the machine to do it. And there will be one person. There might be an anaesthetist. I found most likely they are from the estates team. So even more just highlighting that importance of having that multidisciplinary team, because someone will at least know who has the codes to the machines to be able to access that data. And the other thing I will say is, even if your anaesthetic machine can't, it's essentially, that's just the quantitative aspect of it. You can still do the qualitative survey. You can still get a pretty good idea from your department about the usage, enough to carry on with the project. And I wouldn't have not having access to the hard machine data stop you from going ahead with this, because I think there's enough information that you can get to at least start the project and move it forward.
Lovely, great advice, top tip. Just an echo on there. That might be a good example of, okay, just put on mute, thank you. That might be a good example of something that could be put into the toolkit again as an FAQ or some such, just to, like you say, remind people not to get too hung up on the data if they don't have it available. Lovely. Only a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to we'll have a look at the polls later. I'll send some information out to people, but hopefully we've given you enough information just to whet your appetite. And there's one more poll that I'm going to ask people to fill in. Hopefully, if people have enjoyed it. I can only do a scale of 1 to 5, so we're going to have to be quite tight with our numbering. But yeah, as I said, I've definitely learned something today. I think what we're going to do is, and what we are going to do is digest the questions. We'll just wrap them up and we can email everyone that's been part of this webinar today or who couldn't join but registered, just so you've got some FAQs. I'm just wondering as well whether there might be a nice follow-on event where we could just bring a few people together when we've looked at those FAQs, and just because I always think it's good to bring it to life sometimes as well with some of the responses and answers. So I'll work with the Greener NHS team just to see whether that's feasible and whether they'd want to do that. Lovely. Huaran, you've got your hand up. Would you like to just come in? You're just on mute.
Honestly, I hope you don't mind. Thank you very much. I just wondered, the 3 presenters or 4 presenters, have you done case studies, as in written up case studies that are, you're able to share? I'm just thinking some of those data was awesome and I really want to get it out. And I know, Pete, you've mentioned about getting things online on social media. That'd be great. But if you've got that information either on your website or you're able to put it on your website, hyperlinks will be great, because then we can share that information. But case studies would be even better, because we know NHS believes in evidence-based and you've already done the work. Let's just get that word out there.
I think it's on there. I think on future NHS there was a couple of case studies referenced. We'll definitely share the presentations if the speakers don't mind. I've seen yours before, Mark, and again, as we keep saying, there's some brilliant statistics in both yours and Laura's as well. So let's make sure those case studies are easy to find, promoted on futures, social media, through this community of interest, through this forum. But thank you everyone for your time. That is bang on. So let's end there, and as I said, go and enjoy the rest of your day. But thank you for coming along. It was really appreciated.
Thank you.